Can we go to the non-slideshow screen?
No, that'll do it. It's just
Eric. Okay. So some of the things we heard from the stakeholder groups, flood protection is a big issue. Setbacks are a big issue. That's an example of some of the nonconformities that I mentioned earlier, where the current regulations don't match what's on the ground, and setbacks have become a frequent subject for the Board of Zoning Appeals to deal with, because people are trying to do things, but they're already non-conforming, and it makes it difficult to make improvements. Allowing more flexibility. Right now, the regulations are pretty rigid. We try to build in more latitude, more flexibility to allow things to be done. The permitting process was cited frequently as an example of cumbersome, costly, time-consuming procedures. Layers of authority, standards is a big one. If you've read through the current ordinance, it's filled with words like suitable and adequate, and sort of we'll know it when we see it kinds of criteria for making decisions. And those kinds of terms really have no place in zoning, because we want an ordinance to be as predictable as possible. We want standards that are as objective as possible, and the current regulations don't provide that. Review procedures, again, multiple layers. A lot of decisions are made by a higher level than is really necessary. Maintenance versus improvement, I mentioned. Simplifying the language is a big one. And not eliminating, but at least reducing or minimizing the number of nonconformities throughout the town. Okay, when we started the process and before we worked on a draft, we did a complete analysis of the development standards ordinance. In fact, that analysis was about 40 pages long. One of the things we pointed out was the structure of the districts. Everything is done as a planned development district. Very cumbersome, the number of nonconformities, contradictions in the ordinance throughout, where one section will say one thing and another one has a contradictory provision. The standards are very subjective and arbitrary. Procedures, delegation, the readability. We tried, and no offense to the attorneys in the group, we tried to eliminate as much of the legalese as possible. And we saw that the organization and format of the current document was very difficult to use. Just the numbering system, the lack of headings, the organization with some provisions in a place where you'd never expect to find them, all added to the confusion. So our recommendations were, the first big one was to replace the current approach of having every neighborhood treated as a planned development and going to a more conventional zoning district. Unifying requirements inside and outside of the gate, coming up to the extent possible with objective standards, minimize and reduce nonconformities, redefining multifamily. The current DSO treats all single-family homes that aren't on individual lots as multifamily. And the typical definition of multifamily is multiple units within a single building. It's not single-family units without lots. Distinguishing between maintenance and improvement. delegating more authority to staff and others, simplifying the procedures and reformatting the document. So basically, our analysis reaffirmed all of the input we were receiving from the stakeholders and others. So when we're writing an ordinance, there are certain things that we try to accomplish. The number one is predictability. When we talk to developers or property owners, even staff and commission members, what they're looking for is a rule book that they can look at and know what the requirements are and have at least a reasonable level of confidence that if they follow those rules, they will get an approval. So predictability is a huge goal when we're developing an ordinance like this. We want consistent and fair treatment. And again, if we have arbitrary standards, subjective rules, it's hard to be consistent and fair. So by making it more objective, more concrete, everybody is assured of equal treatment. Reflect existing conditions. The rules have to reflect what has been developed and get rid of the nonconformities to the extent we can. Have objective decision standards and criteria. Allow for more timely decisions, improve the language, and create a more readable format. Those are all things that make for a successful ordinance. So as we started the process, there were a number of things that became apparent that we weren't in a position to say, okay, if we're going to do it this way, we had to go to town council to get their approval to do some of the things that would really define the structure and content of the ordinance. The first big one was moving from planned development districts to more traditional zoning districts based on the use of the property. They agreed with us on that. Going to density and reducing minimum lot size requirements. Right now, the minimum lot size for any new development is 17,500 square feet. Well, most of the existing lots in the town don't come close to that minimum requirement. So we wanted to.
It's 1 acre is the current.
Well, 1 acre, but I think there was, maybe it was before a certain date, there were 17.5. But at any rate, we wanted to have some latitude in changing minimum requirements to reflect what was already there. Changing the definition of multifamily was a big one. Timeshare versus rental units was huge. And some of the comments we've already received in writing from residents reflect that that's an obvious concern. Buffering, we wanted to have more specific standards about where buffering would be required and what type of buffer where, and then allowing for delegation. So those kinds of things required policy changes from the council before we even attempted to make any changes in the ordinance. So among the goals, the ordinance needs to be more readable. We've added text in an outline format. We have tables, we have graphics, we have color, all designed to make it, I'm reluctant to say we'll ever get to the point of making a zoning ordinance inviting, but it's more readable than the current format by a long shot. Eliminate redundancy and conflicting provisions. That was a big one, so that where it says you have to do this in one place, it's not contradicted in another. Reorganizing to make it more user-friendly. Restructuring procedures to be more efficient. Here's an example with site plan approval. right now, all site plans go to the planning commission. And we looked at the kinds of requests that were being reviewed and recommended that some minor things like building additions, small structures, and so on could be handled by staff without the necessity of going to the full planning commission. In addition, the planning commission review of site plans gets into a lot of engineering detail. Sewer and water standards, stormwater standards, grading. And those are things that the planning commission just is not equipped to deal with. So what we recommended for site plan review is that the planning commission would review preliminary plans, which would give them enough detail, enough information to determine what's the use, would meet the setbacks, would provide the parking, would meet all of the ordinance requirements. But then a final site plan would be basically working drawings of sewer pipe sizes and drainage improvements and all the rest that would typically go to the engineering consultants or staff in any case and didn't need the planning commission to review. Establish standards to guide decisions, improve predictability. So again, adding more clear language and specific objective criteria. Facilitate property improvement. That's one of the big things we heard from the stakeholders and from the committee members, that it's become very difficult for owners in many of the areas to improve their property without going to a board of appeals for a variance or jumping through a number of hoops. So we've changed some regulations to help with that. And then lastly, supporting the comprehensive plan. Some of the challenges we faced, it's an existing built out community. There isn't, within the gate, there isn't a lot of land available for development. So we had to recognize that, and the ordinance needed to address what we have now. Something that's very unique to this community is the relationship of the town to the Property Owners Association. So SEPOA has a lot of their own regulations about what you as homeowners or property owners can and can't do within the community. They have the ability to be much more stringent than what the town can be. All the regulations in the development standards ordinance have to relate to a legitimate public purpose. So we can't say all buildings have to be pink if we wanted to. There's no logical public purpose being served by that kind of a regulation. But SEPOA, on the other hand, could, if they were so inclined, have a regulation like that. If you want to live here, you have to abide by their rules. So it was challenging looking at the town's regulation versus what SEPOA requires. And in a lot of cases, we try to make them the same so there wouldn't be conflict, and it would be much easier for the property owners to know what they could and couldn't do. But in other cases, because SEPOA's regulations may have been more restrictive than what the town felt was appropriate, the regulations in the DSO are different. SEPOA has the ability to require something more stringent, but we had to stick with what we felt was defensible. So they're not always the same, but we tried to coordinate as much as possible. The transition from planned development to conventional was a challenge. We had to go back and look at each development and look at the existing lot sizes, existing setbacks, and so on, to tailor the new regulations to those individual conditions. Environmental sensitivity is a big one, obviously with floodplains, the marshes, the coastal area. We had to make sure the regulations were sensitive to those conditions. And then, as I mentioned earlier, positioning the community for whatever future opportunities might come up. So the major changes, the districts. We've gone to more traditional zoning districts. This is the current zoning map, which I think we've got a slide that shows the legend in a little larger size. But the interesting thing, if you look at the current zoning map, it doesn't relate at all to how property is zoned, because all the property is zoned different planned development areas, but that isn't the way the zoning map reads. Whereas the new map is intended to actually zone the property according to what the ordinance provides, and those districts, we have been told, we've already made some changes, that some of the colors for the individual residential districts aren't as distinguishable as they looked on our computer. So we'll make some adjustments to those colors. So this is the legend for the existing zoning map. And we see a single family residential and a multifamily residential category, but we don't have any areas zoned single family residential or multifamily. They're all different neighborhood PUD or PDs. There's no government property zone. There's just a lot of, it's sort of, rather than a zoning district map, it's really almost an existing land use map, how property is used right now without regard to how it's zoned. Whereas the new zoning map clearly distinguishes between the various zoning districts. Other major changes, the criteria. Here's an example from just one paragraph or one section out of the current ordinance. We've got appropriate utilization, detracts from the effects of harmonious appearance, reflects the aesthetic theme, minimizes potentially detrimental impacts. There's no standard there. There's no there. For a 7-member planning commission to look at those terms and try to come up with a consensus is very difficult. Whereas in the new ordinance, we cite specific standards within the ordinance that have to be complied with. The middle paragraph there, 143040, relates to planning commission review of preliminary site plans, but it's very general. Whereas in the new draft, we indicate, okay, preliminary plan goes to the planning commission. Here are the requirements. Here's what's to be reviewed. Here's the timing for it. Here's the number of copies to be submitted. So it's detailed. The applicant knows what's expected going in. More flexibility. The current ordinance allows a few encroachments of architectural features into required yard areas, but there are continual questions that come up about, well, can this qualify? Can I get a variance to put an extension on the home or what have you? We've added a list of the architectural features that can encroach to some extent into a side or rear yard, and we've listed what those are and what the encroachments are permitted to be. So there's no guesswork there. The format, I've read through the existing DSO multiple times looking for things and it's really a difficult document to maneuver. So we've used an outline format. We've tried to put all of the like provisions together. We've used bold headings to highlight different things. We've added graphics, tables, and charts throughout the document. In some cases, one table will replace an entire page of text. Whoop. 1, 2, 5. So the next steps after this afternoon's meeting, we've already received some comments. We certainly expect to hear more comments and questions. So the next step will be to take those, probably go back to both the steering committee and the planning commission to present those comments to them, get their input on what, if any, changes should be made. And again, refine the draft to come up with a 4th draft. That should be the draft that goes to public hearing. Following the public hearing, and the month of November isn't in there because I don't anticipate any meetings in November, but that would be a period where if additional comments come out of the public hearing, that would give us another month or so to make those adjustments, and then on to council, hopefully by the end of the year. I said we probably would have the ordinance adopted by December of 2020, and then COVID hit. So I'm trying not to be overly optimistic, but I think depending on what we hear today and at the public hearing, I think that timeline is doable. That's all I have.
So before we get into the Q&A, I'm just going to do a quick run through of the new zoning map and the zoning transition summary. A little bit closer, so hopefully people can hear me. So I'm going to start with our current zoning map. Yes. So up on the screen currently, we have our current, what's labeled the zoning map. If you pay really close attention, like Paul said, this is not actually the zoning map of the town. If you go and you were to try to find some of these districts in our current DSO, you'll find that those districts don't exist because they're not actually zoning districts of the town. We do not have a single family zoning district. We do not have a multi-family zoning district. We don't, I think we do have a commercial, but it's not called commercial. It's called commercial retail office. So basically this map has no bearing on what property in the town is zoned. Yet for 30 some odd years, this has essentially been the map that the town has used. So for example, when we're looking at residential development, we see most residential is set up as one of 2 categories. One is single family and one is multifamily. And when we look especially at multifamily, where that would create an issue is we're essentially treating all multifamily development the same. So within multifamily, what's on here is the multifamily district. We have everything from true multifamily, like condos. So for example, Pelican Watch and Atrium Villas. But also within multifamily, we have townhomes, like Creek Watch and Beach Club. We have cluster developments, like Summerwind, like Tree Loft and Dune Loft, where they're all individual units separate from each other. But then we also have single family residential development. So the Village at Seabrook, St. Christopher Oaks, Marsh Point Homes. So we have this hodgepodge that we're trying to capture in one zoning district. And as Paul said, when we were looking at our current zoning, we had so many nonconformities because what we were ultimately attempting to do was take one set of zoning regulations and apply those same regulations to all different types of development. And it just wasn't working. So the recommendation that came out of the committee was basically to move away from this hodgepodge that doesn't even reflect what our current DSO says, and move instead to underlying zoning districts. So that's the second map that I'm gonna hopefully pull up on the screen, where when you see property that's zoned a certain color, that color is going to correspond to an actual zoning district in the DSO. So when you see property that's zoned SF2, RSF2, which is a residential single family medium lot, that's going to correspond to something in the ordinance. So if you want to know what the minimum setbacks for that particular piece of property are, you can just go in and look up RSF2 and it'll tell you, here's your front, here's your side, here's your rear, here's your minimum lot size, here's your minimum lot coverage. But we've done that with all of the zoning districts on this map. So what Paul mentioned is we basically, we have recommended this new map to implement what's in the draft DSO. Now, in order to do that, we have to, come up with a transition plan. That's one of the documents that's included on the website, townofseabroogisland.org, is how we recommend transitioning from what's shown on the current zoning map to what's on the proposed zoning map, with the caveat that what's on the current zoning map is not what that property is actually zoned. So what this is recommending is on the left side, by and large, this is not 100% how it's going to work, but probably 98 to 99% of the properties are going to follow this transition schedule. So under our current zoning map, if you see property that's zoned AGC, agricultural conservation, under the new district map, that'll just become a conservation property. What that would include would be lots that are acquired by green space, common areas, open space lots like ponds, buffers, and undevelopable marsh properties. Those would transition to the conservation district. On our current map, we have APR, which I think the A is agricultural. It's not really reflected anywhere, but I believe it's agricultural, parks and recreation. In the new map, that'll just go to straight recreation. So what would be included in the new recreation district would include the club facilities. So the beach club, the golf club, the equestrian and racket centers, the POA recreational facilities, including the boardwalks, the boat ramps, the community center, the community garden, the crab dock, and the lake house. And that's one of the areas where you'll see an actual change where what's on the new map doesn't necessarily reflect what's on the old. is because the way the current map is done, everything that's at the club is a commercial zone. So if you go down to the tip of the island, the island house, the beach club, our current ordinance says, well, those are commercial uses. And what the draft ordinance says is, well, as long as they're accessory to a recreational use, like you can have a restaurant within a golf club, you can have a quick serve restaurant at a beach club. There's no use to have these commercial zoning districts when it's something that's basically just accessory to a recreational use. And there's a reason for that, because once you zone property, you are allowing any use that's permitted within that district. So right now it may be a restaurant associated with a club, but the commercial district might permit a bunch of uses that you may necessarily not want behind the gate or where the club is located. So by doing it this way, we can ensure that what's out there kind of stays more harmonious with the recreational use that exists. We have a current district called agricultural camp, and that'll just transfer over to a new Camp St. Christopher district. I had in there agricultural general was just being straight up eliminated. I actually went back and looked at some of the areas that are currently called agricultural general, and most of those we've actually recommended transitioning to RSF1. Those are essentially areas which could become residential in the future. And the way our ordinance looks at those now is those are intended to be more large lot, single family. So those are really going to transition to RSF1. In our residential districts, right now we just have one single family district. And as Paul said, basically any new lot that's created has to be 1 acre, 43,560 square feet. We understand the intent when council put that on the books. What happened was, by making all new lots have to be 1 acre, there are instances where someone, for example, may combine a lot and decide later on that they want to re-subdivide it out and transfer a piece to a family member or sell that because they no longer have a use for it. The way our current ordinance is worded, it's very restrictive to give someone the ability to take what once was 2 lots and re-subdivide them back into 2 lots. And so with this approach, if you have an RSF2, which is kind of more of the standard lot size, the 17,500 square feet, you might have a little bit more flexibility today than you would have, over the last 30 years, if you combine 2 lots to be able to reestablish that line and re-subdivide them. But it doesn't mean somebody can just go out willy-nilly and start creating all these new lots all over the place. Most of these lots are already developed, they're already recorded. The only way you can start carving out new lots would be if you have a disproportionately large piece of property. And even then, it's going to have to meet all of the other requirements of the ordinance. So minimum lot frontage and minimum lot width and lot area. So it's not just lot area. So single family, again, we would go to SF1, which is large lot, single family, and RSF2, which is medium lot. And under the current DSO, we call those our conforming lots, even though they technically don't conform to what the minimum lot size is. Our current DSO calls those conforming lots at 17,500 square feet. So almost everything that's currently zoned single family will be moved into the RSF2, which is the 17,500 square feet. Only those large parcels which aren't currently developed, a few of the islands kind of separated from the mainland, that's where the RSF1 will be targeted. The biggest changes you'll see are in the multifamily residential districts. And again, like we said, our current DSO just has one multifamily district. It's kind of treated as a catch-all district. In the draft ordinance, we recommend breaking that out into several new districts. So the first one would be RSF3. So we would take areas like Hallover Point Circle, Hidden Oaks, Marsh Creek, Marsh Point, North Beach Village, St. Christopher Oaks, and the village at Seabrook. Those are all single-family detached homes that sit on single-family detached lots. Now they're smaller than a typical lot, probably in the 6,000 or so square foot range. So this draft ordinance would take those out of multifamily and create a new small lot, single-family district, which is going to be more tailored to that particular type of development. Next, we would have RCL, which is the single-family cluster development. Basically, what those are, they're detached homes. Now, they're going to be in a regime or an association where there's common ownership of the common space, but the individual units are privately owned and they're all detached from each other. So Dune Crest, Dune Loft, Sea Loft, Summer Wind, Tarpon Pond, and Tree Loft, those would all be rezoned from multifamily to the new residential cluster development. And again, we'd be able to tailor the zoning requirements for that district to those particular types of units. Third, we would have the RTH district. That would be the townhome district. And what those are is you have multiple units, but they're attached. So they share a common wall from floor to ceiling. And you might have 3, 4, however many units per building. But you would have an individual will own the lot that the unit sits on and the unit itself. And then you would have a regime or association that would control the common area surrounding those. So the townhome district would be applied to Beach Club, Villas, Charlestown Place, Creek Watch, Deer Point, Dolphin Point, Fairway 1, Fiddler's Cove, Gulf Shore, Horseshoe Cove, Salt Marsh, Shadowwood, Shelter Cove, Spinnaker, and Wedgewood. Those would all become townhome zone districts. And then lastly is what we would consider the true multifamily. That's where you have multiple units on within a single building or within one parcel, where you would have typically like a horizontal property regime or association that owns the building itself outside of each individual unit and all the common area. But you just own one condo or one apartment within that particular unit. And those are going to be our RMF, the true multifamily districts. Those would include Atrium, Bay Point, Bohicket, Marina Villas, Center Court, Chateau by the Green, Courtside Villas, Heron Point, High Hammock, Live Oak, Marsh Walk, Ocean Wind, Pelican Watch, and Racket Club Villas would all transition to the new multifamily district. Getting towards the end, we have the support districts. Under the current map, we have CRO, which is commercial retail office, that would transition to limited commercial. Our government property, which is really not a zoning district, would become community facilities. That would apply to Town Hall, the Utility Commission facilities, and St. John's Fire Station. The light industrial district would go away. We would have one new mixed-use district, and that would be the Marina mixed-use district, which would be applied up at the Bohicket Marina and Marketplace area. And it's not shown currently on the map, but there is language in the ordinance where we would create an overlay district along Seabrook Island Road. That would run from Long Bend Drive to Betsy Carrison Parkway. And basically the purpose of that overlay district is to ensure some sort of consistency of development from the area just inside the POA gate all the way up to the traffic circle at Freshfield. So consistency of signage, design, but also we have some enhanced criteria for road access. So anyone who remembers the senior living facility and all the discussion and debate that went on with that one, we'd be taking a lot of what actually went into the negotiated agreement to settle that lawsuit and formalizing that in this new overlay district. So coming up with a process, procedure, and requirements that all new development would follow, primarily in the areas outside of the gate where access would be provided off of Seabrook Island Road. So again, just to pull that up on the map on the screen here. And as Paul said, we did get a couple comments about, folks having some difficulty distinguishing between some of the different colors. It's kind of been the bane of my existence. I've been doing this for over 15 years. When you look at the recommended color schemes, I think those come from the American Planning Association, especially when you use yellow for residential. There's only so many different shades of yellow that are going to render the same on a computer screen as they will on a printout. So we actually have gone through and adjusted a couple of these a little bit. Primarily the new RSF3, the small lot, single family. So now they're going to look a little bit more gold, just to try to distinguish those from the SF2 lots. But you can see basically each the multifamilies where you're going to see the biggest change, because each multifamily regime or association is going to transfer to a district that more closely aligns to what's actually out there on the ground. So with that, Paul, anything you want to add to the map information? All right. Well, then I guess at this point, we will open the meeting up for some public comments and feedback. We'll start. We do have two residents or property owners here in the room with us. So we will give you guys a first crack at it if you have any questions or comments.
Yeah, I guess I do. I'm Ted Florloggy with my wife Betty. We live at 3062 Baywood Drive, sort of right in the middle of the island. Based on the new map, the new zoning map, we would probably be RSF2 on zoning. When we bought the property and built the house, the vacant lot next to us, a privately owned house next to us, we expected that the Baywood area and probably Cattail Pond and a couple of other internal streets that are single family home streets like those would be residential and people similarly situated to our situation. In other words, I'm retired, Betty's retired. The only people using our house upon retirement are us as a family. We are a family unit. We were required upon purchasing a lot to name the family members who would be part of our family unit. Everybody knows who would be considered our family unit based on what has been filed. Now, I don't know whether this is the right format, but or place to say things like this or include things like this, but if you look at the Seabrook Island vision statement, the mission statement is to preserve property values and enhance the quality of life of all property owners. Our interpretation of what that means in a single family context is quiet enjoyment of our property. Since we moved in, since we got our occupancy permit in 2018 and actually moved down here last year, the neighborhood has changed dramatically. The number of houses have sold, the real estate market being what it is, exceptionally high prices, and I know that's good, are being paid for property when it changes hands. There have been at least 3 houses in the middle of the Baywood area that have become rental properties. There have been complaints, and I believe they're on record about one of the rental properties and probably the other one, and we are in the middle of 2 of those properties. There have been occasions when there have been 6 to 8 cars parked on driveways, towels left out in the front, trash cans not picked up, the garbage when the last tenant leaves left on the street and not cleaned up. I've cleaned it up myself on occasion. Noise, there is more noise than would be expected. There are parking issues. There have been citations issued for people parking on the street overnight or where the islands are. If anybody knows everybody knows Baywood, there are 4 or 5 islands. You're not supposed to park within 50 feet of the confluence of the island. That has been an ongoing situation through the course of the summer. Now, one way to deal with things like that is enforcement. And I think with the meeting perhaps last December, there has been more effort to enforce the regulations and the rules with regard to all properties. And that's good. I don't think it's gone far enough. And I mentioned we had a vacant lot next to us. It's now being developed. It's been under construction for about 7 months now. I have it in good authority from the owner that it will be a rental property, at least for the immediate future. The driveway is within 6.5 feet of our property line. The garage faces our house. It is a 3,500 square foot house with 5 bedrooms. If it is rented, there could be 15 to 20 people in that house on occasion. That's why people rent houses like that for $8,000 to $10,000. It could be a party house. It's right on a golf course, and there are issues about noise and what have you, but that is an ongoing concern of ours. There is no regulation of the number of rental properties in what would be the SFR SF2 zoning district. I advocated last December limits such as those established by Kiowa in 2 of their residential districts. It is essential to preserve our quality of life, Betty and Michael. I'm not speaking for anybody else here. The quality of life that we expect in Seabrook to limit the changes that increased rental property presence on the island and the single family communities will cause. Now I'm going to go to the SAPOA rules and regulations, February 8th, 2021. I don't think anybody will contest the fact that operating a rental property is a business. The customer is the person who rents the property from either the agent or the owner. The business, if it operates on a private property, and there is Section E use of property for business purposes on Seabrook Island, business use of property must not cause a nuisance or an increase in traffic, vehicles and/or individuals. Given what I've said and the observations I've made thus far, it is inevitable there will be more traffic, both human and vehicular. That includes cars, it includes trucks, it includes the low-speed vehicles, it includes bicycles and everything else that goes with it, all on the driveway right next to our house. To or from the residence where such activities are being conducted. Adequate all-street parking must be available at the residence. Business-related vehicles may not be parked on the street or right-of-way. The business activity must not diminish the residential private character of the island, and there must be no visible evidence that a business is being operated from the property. In those 3 instances I've mentioned on Baywood and solely limited to Baywood, obviously the character of those properties have changed since we moved in. It is certainly not what we expected. It is not consistent with the quality of life and the quiet enjoyment of the property that we expected. I am advocating that this zoning reconsider rental limits on the single family property areas such as ours. I'm advocating a regulation such, or zoning ordinance such as that adopted by Kiowa, and that's off record. I think it's been mentioned before. Everybody knows what Kiowa did in their 2 zoning districts. I think that people such as Betty and I, in light of the fact that we were not down here full time and we were really, it's our fault, weren't paying attention when all this was ongoing, all the DSO and the zoning changes were ongoing. we didn't realize what it all meant in terms of how it would impact us as future full-time residents of Seabrook. That said, we love the place. We love going out to Pelican Watch. We love going to North Beach. We love the golf courses. We love everything about it, except the changes that have occurred. That would be readily corrected in the event of a limit on the amount of rental properties in the single family communities. I'm going to recommend 10%. I think 10% in on Baywood would be 8.4 properties. That could be rental properties, no more than that. I don't know if that is going to correct the problem, but at least it would limit the ability of people buying houses to turn them over as rental properties to recover some of the money that they spent on the purchase price of the house, given the current environmental or economic conditions. I think probably a referendum would be a good idea. And perhaps by the time of the next election, a referendum could be submitted to the general population to find out if other people similarly situated agree. I don't know if it could be limited to this SF1 and SF2 communities within the current zoning, where it should be vetted to the entire community. But there ought to be a way to find out in an actual plebiscite or referendum, if you will, to find out if people who live in communities like Baywood and Cattail Pond and Cat and Sam's, et cetera, want limits on rental properties. I don't know if you know that or not. I don't know if you've actually conducted such a referendum or plebiscite. If so, I wasn't a part of it. I believe that would be very useful. There's been a lot of next door and various communications back and forth, which discuss this issue. We really don't know where everybody stands on this issue at this point. There was some back and forth back in December. I made a public statement, other people made public statements. It seems like a good idea to me. We have the right to do it legally, to impose such regulations with the grandfather conditions that Kiowa has imposed and reapplication required, et cetera. I don't see why we wouldn't try to find out if people in the community want that to happen. I did make some other, ask some other questions and have another comment in what I filed electronically Sunday, I guess. But the bottom line is that gets to the bottom line. And that is my request as a property owner on Seabrook. And with that said, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions or comments?
No, I'm just here to get information.
Just to observe? All right. Okay, so the next thing we'll do, I know we have a bunch of people on the line via Zoom, so I'm just gonna pull up on the screen and do a quick screen share. If you would like to speak, either by asking a question or submitting a comment, hopefully you're able to see that. We are now opening the public hearing for those who are joining us by Zoom. If you would like to speak, we'll ask you to use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Got the video feeds in here. If you are on a computer or tablet, you would just click on the participants tab, and then you should see a button that says raise hand. If you are on a mobile device, you would click on the participants tab. You may have to click on your own name, and then you'll see an opportunity to raise your hand. And then if you are joining us by phone, you can press the *9 button to raise your hand. And we will attempt to go through and open the floor to each person, hopefully in the order that the hands have been raised. So we have, depending on how many people want to speak, we have about 45 or so minutes left in our open house. So just to try to get to as many people as we can. Just ask each individual to be brief with your comments, and the more specificity you can give us and what you're requesting, which I appreciate. You gave us something specific that you were requesting. The better it will be for us to take that information and present it to the committee and council. So with that, at this time, I see 2 hands raised. So I will go ahead and unmute Steve Q. I hope I said that right.
You did, thank you, and I'll try to be quick. You put up the 2 different zoning maps. Obviously, the current one that you said contains some property descriptions or areas that the town doesn't even recognize, and then you put up the proposed zoning map. I own a property on Jenkins Lagoon in Jenkins Point. I bought that property, I don't know, a year or so ago. And when I bought that property, obviously I looked at the current zoning map. I looked at the Charleston County property records as to what I backed up to. And I backed up to 31.34 acres of agricultural land. That's what it's recorded at the Charleston County deed records. That's what was shown on the current Seabrook Island zoning map. In the proposed zoning map, that 31.34 acre piece of property is no longer shown as agricultural. It's shown as a RSF1, large residential piece of property. Then when I go and look at the proposed DSO, if I'm reading that correctly, with regard to those RSF1 properties, that's to allow for the creation of future estate size home sites. That's under section 5.1. Then under section 5.3, with regard to properties of 1 acre or more, the density is 1 structure per acre. So my question is, why is that being changed from agricultural to RSF1 when I'm not aware that the property owner has requested that? Number 2, does that mean that I am potentially now backing up to what is currently marsh and pristine property to 31 potential new home sites? That's my question.
Not knowing which one specifically you back up again. A good portion of that property is
I'm
marsh.
at 12. Yeah, I'm at 1211 Jenkins Lagoon North. So if you come in from Jenkins Point Road on the 3rd lot in there, there are 2 houses actually under construction next door to me. And I don't know that those people know what they're about to back up to.
If you were driving on Jenkins Lagoon, would you be on the left or the right?
Yeah.
Or
Well, the right is the rookery. There's nothing there. So that's a pump. So if you take a right into Jenkins Lagoon Drive North, I'm the 3rd lot in. The first 2 lots are currently under construction. I have a neighbor to the other side of me who is a nice lady who's been there for years. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lots on that street.
yeah, so while the zoning is changing from an agricultural to an RSF1, I'm going to try to pull up on the screen. Let's see. The language from our current ordinance, when we have, and I think that's agricultural general currently, if I remember right. Let me take a look.
Yes, sir. It's the yellow with the hashtags through it.
Yeah, agricultural general. So what our current DSO says about agricultural general. So I can see. Is that the purpose of the district is to promote agricultural as a primary use and to accommodate limited low-density single-family residential development as a secondary use. It's anticipated that a change in zoning designation to PD would be necessary for any substantial non-agricultural development of property in this district. So basically what the language in the current district is saying that it's essentially set aside and anticipated that that would likely be low density, single family residential development, and would have to go through the PD process. Now, what we're doing is we're basically taking away PDs, and then also the agricultural district is going away. Well, I say it's going away, it's really more transferring to the lowest of all the density single family districts that we have in the DSO. So I think I understand what your concern is that the way it's worded currently is that it would require a change in the zoning in order to be developed. And your concern is that if it goes to RSF1, it could be developed with those large estate size lots without going through a public rezoning process?
Correct, and I'm unaware that anybody's requested that change.
No, and there is no pending request for that property, and a good chunk of it's marsh and wetlands and couldn't be developed anyway, but so I just wanted to make sure I understood the basis of the concern. Did I capture that right?
Yeah, I mean, you did. I mean, look, unfortunately, and I apologize, these meetings turn into whose ox is being gored, right? And so, I get that, and I'll try not to dwell on it. It's just when I bought the house, I like to look at the marsh and trees, not my neighbor who's grilling some hot dogs. So, but I get it. I just wanted to make sure that I understood what was happening and why there was the elimination of that. Well, one, why the change was being made at all, since I was unaware that a request was being made by the property owner. And number two, that we were somehow bypassing the planned development aspect of the current DSO and rezoning it to allow for estate size lots to be placed on whatever buildable property exists without anybody making that request for a change.
Okay, and yeah, like I said, just to be clear, there is no request to change it. That was just a transitional change by doing away with one district and a recommendation to get to another. So we can look at that, take it before the committee as well.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have any other questions or comments?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right. So the next hand we have raised is Paul Mclaughlin. I'll go ahead and unmute you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. How are you?
Here, we got you. I'll open it up if you have any questions or comments.
Yeah, well, first of all, I hope everybody's safe and sound from this stupid COVID, and no one else gets sick. The SAPOA offices have shut down, unfortunately, because of it, but I hope everybody stays well. As you know, I've submitted a number of comments in a couple of formats to you all. It seems to me, and I don't want to go over turf that Ted has already spoken about, but I agree with him 100%. And as I said in a recent email, I think we have to look beyond the notion of facilities, and we have to look at capacity with regard to the rental property issue, because that's, to me, is the problem. This past summer, we had a capacity problem on the island with lots of people coming on there. And we have to understand what the capacity looks like in the face of the island. Residential properties, according to the current zoning, that are rented have an average occupancy, max occupancy of 11 people, while villas, those places that fall within regimes, have an average occupancy of 6. So every time a house comes online on Seabrook that becomes a rental property, it's double the size of what a regime property would have. So I think we have to look at capacity as well as actual number of facilities. And I don't understand why that's being dismissed by the board and has been repeatedly dismissed by the board. But I think it's an important issue to look at and deal with in this round. Also, my other concern, because I don't want to repeat myself too much, is in the current zoning, there are certain property descriptions, there are descriptions of what the purpose of the property area is. And those have been largely taken out of the current document. In the current one, as I said in my statement, the current language says for residential properties, provide quiet, low density neighborhoods, to discourage unwarranted encroachment by prohibiting commercial uses and to prohibit other uses which would interfere with the development and continuation of single family uses, to discourage non-conforming uses, and to discourage uses which would generate traffic on minor streets other than required to serve residents on those streets. That language has been completely eliminated. And I think it's important language because it gives people two things. One is it gives them a sense of what they're buying into. What is this area that I'm buying into that I'm going to own and spend a lot of money on? And the second is, I think, gives them protection to existing property owners to raise questions with town about decisions that you're making, because you go back to your document and say, look, at what you're proposing is contrary to the purpose of this particular district. So that you've taken all that out and you've taken away those protections from us. And I think they need to be reinstituted back in there. And if you have to go to each of those particular categories and propose some different types of language, because there might be some new ones, new categories, then you should go ahead and talk with those groups and get their sense of what they think their community is about, what their zone is about, and come up with a descriptive description of what the purpose of that area is and what purpose is it served, what goals is it achieved. And I think that's very, very important protection. And why that was taken out, I don't know, but I think it would be a good time to sort of ask why. Why were those things taken out? And I won't repeat what else I've said in writing to you all.
So just so I can verify that we're looking at the same thing. So for example, this is what I'm trying to pull it up on the screen, what our current single family residential has under the purpose statement for the district: to provide for quiet, low density residential,
Right.
warranted commercial uses, discourage non-conforming uses, and those which generate traffic. I don't know if that's popping up or not, but and your concern was in the current draft of the DSO, that language was removed, and you think it would be better to have to restore those descriptive characteristics and the purpose statement for each of those districts.
And I think that's important then in terms, just from a business standpoint, if everybody's concerned about property values, I think it's good to have that flag waving to people who want that. You have a community, this is a section of the community that this is what this is about. And so that draws people so that they're not misunderstanding what they're buying. So I think having some description like that is very, very important. And again, this whole question of property value is I think it's kind of a mistake for the town to sort of get into that area, because I think it's a minefield, but that's your decision. But I think that from a marketing standpoint and from a buyer beware standpoint, having this as disclosure, this is what you're buying into, and this is what you can expect as the characteristics of this community, is very, very important. And also gives us a stick to push back on the town when they're making what we think are bad decisions. And I agree with Ted. I think that you made a terrible decision on the rental properties. And I've expressed that, in a variety of different ways. I think we've left ourselves way too vulnerable to the business interests and sacrificed a lot. I think eventually it's going to we're all going to pay a very heavy price for that when the downturn in the real estate market occurs and these rental properties all of a sudden become troubled properties. Thank you very much. Hello, Fredro. I lost something. I don't hear anything from anybody. Did other people lose sound? I have no sound.
Are you able to hear me? Let's see if I can unmute Jerry.
I'm not sure why you're unmuting me, Joe.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. We had a Zoom crash here, so we're trying to get that set back up. For some reason, I was trying to talk, and I don't think Paul was able to hear me. Let's see. All right, so we've had some technical difficulties. Hopefully everyone's able to hear me. We have lost our main Zoom feed. I'm trying to get back to you on a cell phone, so I apologize for that. Technology, go figure. It's great when it works. Let's see. Is there anyone else? And Paul, we did get your full comments, so I have a note of that. I checked with our consultant, Paul LeBlanc, and he was following what you were saying before we lost our feed here. So he'll go back and review those the purpose statements for each of those districts, and we'll plan on bringing those back up with the committee to make sure that our statements accurately reflect the purpose of each of those districts. Was there anyone else who wished to ask a question or provide a comment on the draft DSO? If there are, you can hit the raise hand button while we do that. We did have a couple that came in prior to today's meeting, so we'll just take a couple minutes to run through those. We had a couple from Wendy Walker, and the first question she asked about was the timeline for approval of the DSO, and I think Paul covered that in the presentation, but I would assume we're probably going to be looking at final approval by the end of this year. That's our hope and our goal at this point. We know there's going to be some additional comments and feedback that comes in both this week and over the next few weeks and during the public hearing process. So we'll, we certainly don't want to rush through to have something adopted just to have it adopted, but at the same time, we are cognizant of the fact that this thing's been going on for quite a long period of time. While we have been dealing with COVID related issues. Thankfully, our committee was still able to meet some virtually over the last year. So I think Paul said probably over the last 3 or 4 meetings, we're at the 2-yard line and just got to get the thing in the end zone. So fairly close to getting into the adoption phase. There was another question about the POA's construction deposit. This ordinance doesn't really change anything to do with the POA. They still have all of their requirements in place, and it also does not adjust or in any way change the role or responsibilities of the POA's Architectural Review Committee. Paul, I think this is a question for you on the lot coverage. She noted there was a distinction, or was asking if there was a distinction between structural elements and hardscape, or have those been collapsed into a single figure, and using, for example, RSF3 lot coverage is 50%. Does that include the dwelling, deck, patio, and any other type of hardscape? I know in the past, we governed only the structure itself, but not the hardscape, whereas the POA included both.
Building structures and all impermeable surfaces as part of lot coverage. And that's stated in the definition of lot coverage in the ordinance.
Okay. Let's see if I'm able to get back into the meeting from this computer. For clarification, in 12.2D, parking for single-family dwellings, does a garage meet the required parking requirement for a single-family
Yes.
dwelling? Yes, thank you very much. In table 2.4E, could you provide classification for decorative shed roof overhangs supported by brackets? Does this classify as an awning or canopy, or eaves and gutters for encroachment? So what is basically meant by when you can have decorated roof overhangs encroaching into a setback?
From what I could gather of her description, it's an overhang that actually has structural supports from the side of the building. So in my view, that would be more than an eave. That would be more like an awning based on the structural supports.
Okay. And one I thought was a really interesting one about single-family residential lighting. And it says light fixtures mounted on a building in a residential district may not be mounted above the first floor of a building. How does that relate to when you have an elevated home? Is that the first habitable floor of the building, or is that something that we need to clarify? And
I think that's something we need to go back and look at. If I remember correctly, that may be a SAPOA standard that we just incorporated into the ordinance. But in any case, it's something we want to look at. If we have that condition prevalent throughout the community, we want to make sure that we're not preventing someone from having a light at their front door just because the front door is technically a second story.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I think that's one that probably warrants a little bit of additional discussion with the POA. We also had a couple questions from Eve Herbick, 2781 Little Creek Road. She asked, are these rules approved by SAPOA? These are not necessarily approved by SAPOA. The POA will have its own set of rules and requirements, which can be more strict than what the town has. We've tried to eliminate, probably not all, but probably a good chunk of any conflicts that may exist between town and POA requirements as they stand. But as with any regime, any association, whether existing or future, they can have requirements that are more strict than what the town has. The primary difference between the town and the POA is where the jurisdiction lies. The town has jurisdiction throughout the entire community, including areas behind the gate, whereas the POA only has limited jurisdiction in the areas behind the gate. Now, granted, it's probably about 98% overlap, but the town's requirements will apply both inside and outside the gate, whereas the POAs are only inside.
I think it's important to point out that the director of SEPOA was a member of the steering committee, and she was very active in our meetings, provided some good information. So we were able to, if not completely reflect SEPOA's regulations, we were aware where there were conflicts and did our best to make some adjustments.
And Katrina, if you're watching, we appreciate your participation in the committee process, as well as all of our other volunteers who served on the committee as well. Let's see. I know, Ted, you had a chance to speak a little while ago. Were there any other questions that you had submitted that we didn't get to, or? Okay. We had one from Lee Hesberg, 3450 Deer Run. Can you describe which lots are medium and which are large lots? I think we had covered that one, but just to state it again, pretty much all of the existing single family lots are going to transition to RSF2, which is the medium lot, the 17,500 square foot minimum lot size. It's the neighborhoods that are part of a regime or association will become the RSF3. So the single family ones, including the Village and Marsh Point, Marsh Creek, and a few others, those will become RSF3 with a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. And the RSF1, I don't know that there's any real buildable lots that are going to be zoned RSF1. It's basically, as it stands today, intended to be more of a placeholder for potentially future single family. So again, most of what's out there, if it's an existing single family lot, by and large, those are going to transition to RSF2. And I know there was also a question raised with the current language in our ordinance, with the requirement that all new lots have to be 1 acre. With us transitioning to RSF2, it will allow a little bit more flexibility potentially if you had 2 lots that were combined in the past. I know there's been some where they were combined, and there may have been an addition that was put on a house, and the way the ordinance is worded currently, the only way you could re-subdivide is if you put the line exactly where it was. And if there's an addition, you may not be able to do that and still meet the setback requirements. So this might create a little bit more flexibility, but we can look at your case individually. And Paul Mclaughlin, we had covered his as well regarding the particularly the purpose statement for the residential district. So with that, if we don't have any other additional comments or anybody who would like to ask any questions, I know, Mayor, you've been abnormally quiet. Anything you would like to add?
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing additional, then I think we will go ahead and we can adjourn this meeting about 15 minutes or so early. Again, we apologize for our technological issue, but we appreciate everyone staying with us. Again, if you have any questions or comments that you didn't have a chance to ask today, or if you think about after today's meeting, you can go onto our website at townofseabrookisland.org and submit those to us. Like I said at the beginning, those all come to me. So we'll make sure that we get those reviewed and if necessary, take those back to the advisory committee and council for additional review and feedback. So other than that, we appreciate everyone for participating in today's meeting, either in person or virtually. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.